Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, it's been a while, but let's talk some boxing. So, I was looking at, the general consensus of boxers and people in the boxing industry, and most people agree that the best boxer in the world right now, or the pound for pound best boxer in the world, is Terrence Crawford. And I've heard names floating around like Vasily Lomachenko and Mikey Garcia, and I find it very interesting. You even hear names like Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua. If you look at the ring, for example, right now, their ratings for pound best fighters in the world include Vasily Lomachenko, Terrence Crawford, Canelo's up in there, Gennady Golovkin, Alexander Usyk, Naoya Inoue, Mikey Garcia, Srisket Rungvisai, and guys like Spence Jr. and Donnie Nietis. Even seeing BoxRec. BoxRec's rankings have Terrence Crawford as number one, then Alvarez, and then Golovkin, Lomachenko, and Louis Neary. Okay, Anthony Joshua's up in there. And Roger Mayweather says when you really want to talk about a boxer's accomplishments, you really have to look at who that boxer fought and who they beat. I think that's the bottom line. But of course, pound for pound has different criteria for different people. But I always look at who a boxer fought and who they beat. And when you put it in that perspective, it gets very interesting. That is their resume. I think a boxer's resume says quite a lot. Of course, who somebody fights and who they beat, it also depends on when they beat them and all of that. I understand all of that. But still, let's have a look. So, Terrence Crawford. First, let's look at his resume. So, when you look at Terrence Crawford's resume, he really starts beating people that really are worth the while to talk about, or household names, in Ricky Burns. His win against Ricky Burns is very memorable for a number of reasons. One is he went down into Scotland, Glasgow, and he went into Ricky Burns' backyard, and he beat him, and he took the WBO lightweight title from him. Ricky Burns had been the WBO lightweight champion for a while. He had been the WBO lightweight champion for 4 fights. So by the time he faced Terrence Crawford, he had defended his title 4 times. Okay? And then he lost to Terrence Crawford. He had broken his jaw against Raimundo Beltran, who had been juicing, and we only found out that later on. He was a legitimate world champion. He had defended his title, etc. And if you look at Ricky Burns, after he had been beaten by Terrence Crawford, when Terrence Crawford moved up in weight, Ricky Burns became lightweight world champion once again, and then he went on to become super lightweight world champion after that. Ricky Burns was a good win for him. Solid win. Wasn't a household name. Wasn't one of those spectacular guys with a spectacular resume, but still somebody you should really mention. He's solid. Now, the guy that really makes Terrence Crawford's resume and really makes his reputation is Yuriorkis Gamboa. Yuriorkis Gamboa is undefeated. He wasn't, however, a lightweight world champion. He was actually a featherweight world champion, I believe it was. And he jumped up 2 notches to pass super featherweight to lightweight to face Terrence Crawford. And he gave him the fits for a couple of rounds before Terrence Crawford really started to take over and stop him. But the point is, a much smaller guy. This is like when Juan Manuel Marquez jumps up from lightweight to face Floyd Mayweather on Floyd Mayweather's return. And Terrence Crawford had been boxing all the time. So the marquee name that really makes Terrence Crawford's career is Yuriorkis Gamboa. Okay? And he'll even say it. That's the best competition he faced. There really isn't any other notable name of long reigning or reigning and defending champion that he's faced. Every other champion he's faced, which was undefeated, which is good, like Jeff Horn or Ndongo, Terrence Crawford beat this guy who had defended his world title and unified with Ricky Burns. That's what happened. Didn't have a whole lot of experience, but he had he had a defense as a world champion and a unification. Okay. Anyway, he faced Terrence Crawford to cause Terrence Crawford to become the undisputed, and this hadn't happened in a long time, super lightweight world champion. All right, but if you look, Judas Ndongo didn't really have much fights as a world champion. Victor Postol had no fights as a world champion. The other guy who he beat was a world champion. So basically, his 2 best wins were Yuriorkis Gamboa and Ricky Burns. Okay, to this day, and the other world champion I think was Jeff Horn, who had no defenses whatsoever. So when you look at Terrence Crawford, he's facing these upcoming fighters, yes. and he had done something in becoming undisputed super lightweight world champion. But it wasn't the same as, say, Danny Garcia, who had faced very experienced fighters and so on. His best win to date has been Yuriorkis Gamboa. Not even Ricky Burns. Yuriorkis Gamboa, because Ricky Burns is a long reigning champion, really spectacular, exciting at lower weight classes. So when you look at Terence Crawford and you say he's pound for pound #1 in the world, what are you really going on? Not on resume. Definitely not on the level of opposition he's faced. You're probably looking at the exciting way in which he has finished his fights, closed out his fights, and knocked out opponents. And you look at his skill set, how he's a switch hitter and stuff like that. So maybe that's what you're going with. But you're definitely not going on resume, because the best opponent he's faced to this day is Yuriorkis Gamboa. And that's not really saying much, because Gamboa wasn't even in his weight class. So that's why when I hear people saying Terence Crawford is the pound for pound best in the world, I'm like, but what challenge has he really faced? Who has he faced that we can say, like a Sean Porter, who's at least been IBF world champion and is currently the WBC world champion, difficult style, has really fought some high level competition, which most of the competition Terence Crawford has not faced that kind of level of competition. Or when has he faced a Danny Garcia? That would be a nice matchup, or a Mikey Garcia, or these are names, and these are people who have proven themselves. You know what I mean? Keith Thurman, Errol Spence Jr. Not even, because Errol Spence Jr. hasn't really proven himself. Errol Spence Jr.'s best competition. Oh, that's the guy I'm missing. Errol Spence Jr. has been Kell Brook. That's all. Errol Spence has beaten no one else. Lamont Peterson, but Lamont Peterson's not really a welterweight, and Lamont Peterson has a long reputation, but he's been stopped by guys like, the guy who just been recently stopped by Pacquiao. So when you're really thinking about it, Lamont Peterson is a good world champion. He's a known name, but he's not like, he's tough and everything, but he's not like a Danny Garcia. Okay, so Errol Spence Jr. is not even, they're talking about Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. I think you should face like a Keith Thurman or something, because those guys are much more experienced than Errol Spence Jr. at welterweight, if you think about it, right? Yeah. When you look at Lomachenko, Vasily Lomachenko, in terms of resume, not in terms of skill set or what he's accomplished in such small fights, but his best competition today has been two fighters, Jorge Linares and Guillermo Rigondeaux. Jorge Linares, by and large, is the lightweight champion. He was the man at lightweight, okay? He was the most experienced guy, had a lot of fights under his belt. Didn't really have marquee names that he had beaten, but he had a lot of fights on his belt, and he had won as world champion. And Guillermo Rigondeaux, again, not in the weight class, but 2 weight classes down, super bantamweight, was the man at super bantamweight, the feared guy at super bantamweight. These are the guys that Vasily Lomachenko makes his reputation on, particularly Guillermo Rigondeaux. Gary Russell Jr. and Orlando Salido, but again, Orlando Salido is a good name, by the way. But at the end of the day, he hasn't really faced a marquee name that's outstanding, except for Orlando Salido, who really has a long-term reputation. Nicholas Walters did some pretty good defenses. He showed that he was the man at super featherweight, but still at the same time, and Lomachenko beat him pretty comprehensively. He's not like this long-standing reputation, this name out there, right? Like, for instance, when you talk about Guillermo Rigondeaux, he's a name out there. He wasn't in the weight class. Yuriorkis Gamboa. So the best win for Vasily Lomachenko is really Guillermo Rigondeaux, who is not in his weight class, or most recently Jorge Linares. Okay, those are the 2 biggest names he's got. And Mikey Garcia again doesn't really have names. His name, really, his real name he can ride on is Adrian Broner. Everybody else is not really a long reigning champion. Orlando Salido was a good win, but that's it. It's basically Salido and Broner. That's what you got. He beat other upcoming guys like Robert Easter Jr. He's got a lot of undefeated fighters he's beaten, but again, a lot of it is not guys with reputation, long-standing. I'm going to show you something. So when you're talking resume, that tells us levels of competition. Alexander Usyk, again, the same thing. He's beaten a lot of people, and champions and stuff, but his best opponent's about to be Tony Bellew. Like, everybody else is not as good as Tony Bellew. So it's just like what it is, right? And we look at Anthony Joshua. His best competition, obviously, is Vladimir Klitschko. Klitschko's the guy. Now, he's beaten some upcoming champions like Joseph Parker, and he's beaten Charles Martin. But really, his hallmark is everything that he's building everything over. It's Klitschko. That's his best name. Now, why I say that is because when you look at the resume of these guys, it tells you something. Errol Spence Jr. shouldn't even be mentioned in the equation with these guys in terms of resume. But nonetheless, when you look at Alvarez, it's a totally different picture. Alvarez has faced Gennady Golovkin twice. Okay, then he has also faced Miguel Cotto. These are the best in their divisions. Cotto was the lineal champion at middleweight. Gennady Golovkin was the man at middleweight and pound for pound #1 in the world. And then he faced also Floyd Mayweather. Those three names alone blow away everybody that we just talked about. So when you're talking resume-wise and the level of competition Canelo has faced, way in advance of those other guys. We're not talking about former world champions. We're not talking about all the experience from them and facing them. We're not talking about all of that. We're just talking about the best that he currently faced. And that's really impressive. And that's why when people say that, they leave Canelo out of pound for pound #1 rankings, that he shouldn't be pound for pound #1 boxer in the world, I just can't understand it, because it's like you look at what he's faced, then you look at his skill set, then you look at how he beat these guys. If you really pay attention, these other guys have not done that. You guys have a great one.